Hello, welcome to this video. We're going to read the poem Punishment and then we're going to go through some of the annotations. This is part of the conflict section in the OCR poetry anthology Towards a World Unknown. Normally we start with the poet and I give you some background information that's useful for the context, but I'm just going to read it to you today and see if you can work out what it's about. So let's read it together. Punishment. I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck, the wind on her naked front. It blows her nipples to amber beads, it shakes the frail rigging of her ribs. I can see her drowned body in the bog, the weighing stone, the floating rods and boughs, under which at first she was a barked sapling that is dug up, oak bone, brain firking. Her shaved head like a stubble of black corn, her blindfold a soiled bandage, her noose a ring to store the memories of love. Little adulteress, before they punished you, you were flaxen-haired, undernourished, and your tar-black face was beautiful. My poor scapegoat. I almost love you, but would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. I am the artful voyeur of your brain's exposed and darkened combs, your muscles webbing, and all your numbered bones. I, who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings, who would connive in civilized outrage, yet understand the exact and tribal, intimate revenge. So this is a very strange poem and very difficult one to work out unless you have, as I suggest you may need, the specific contextual details. So what is this poem all about? Well, grab your highlighters and your pens and we'll go through some of these key points together. The first thing to tell you, of course, if you haven't heard of this poet, Seamus Heaney, he's a very famous poet. He's well regarded the world over. He's an Irish poet and he talks a lot about Irish heritage, the land and culture. And he was poet laureate for a while, so he's very famous, as I said, very well regarded, not just in Ireland but across the whole world. He was also a lecturer in the States, I think at Harvard University, so he's someone to be taken really seriously, and one of my favourite modern poets. So why is he talking about this woman in all this sort of excruciating detail in this graphic poem called Punishment? This isn't a woman that he knows, and how could he possibly know this person? Because he's talking here of the key contextual detail that you need to know is he is talking about a woman or a girl who has been uncovered in a bog in North Germany. Now it's thought that she's about 2,000 years old when she's discovered. So this isn't a girlfriend of his, this is not someone that he knows. She was part of an Iron Age village in Europe, in North Germany. Okay, so she has a name, this girl. She's called Windby I think a capital I like that. Okay, it's worth saying, I'm going to put girl in inverted commas here, because it's worth saying that scientists who later did studies and experiments on this body were led to the conclusion that this was actually a teenage boy. So while Heaney is talking about this person, this body that's uncovered, that's discovered in North Germany, he actually believes it to be a girl because at first it was. So in this poem, I know that some of you will get in touch and say, actually it's a boy. That's fine, but we're going to talk about her as though she is a girl. That's the persona today. It doesn't really make sense as a poem if it's a teenage boy. So we're going to say girl. Okay, so Windby I is this girl. So this was discovered in around, discovered sort of 1950s. So Heaney got really interested in this whole series of discoveries. He hasn't just got this one poem about it, he's got loads of bog people poems, which are really cool and interesting to read, but people find them a little bit freaky, a little bit weird, because as you saw in the poem, he sort of talks about how he loves "I almost love you," and I'm the artful voyeur, someone who looks at something to get pleasure from something. So it's a bit of a weird poem to get your head around, to kick us off today. So he imagines what this girl did wrong, because she is found in this bog with a noose around her neck, so she's being punished for something. Okay, so he imagines what she did wrong, why is she being punished, and it's clear that she's been killed, and he is led to believe that maybe it is adultery. As we put in there, little adulteress, it says down here, before they punished you. So he imagines that she's probably being caught in some kind of sexual sin, and that's how they've punished her. So it gets him thinking about other women and how they are punished for other sexual sins. And this is the big link in this poem. It's not just about this girl, the Wimby Eye, it's about the way women are punished and the role of women in society in Northern Ireland. So he links this to the women in Northern Ireland, and it's worth saying that he's this specifically the Catholic women in Northern Ireland and how they are punished for like dating, going out with. Pen's running out. Just a second. Okay, I'm back. How they are punished for going out with unionist men. So obviously you know that Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are in massive conflict all the way through the 20th century, and to put people off, to put women off marrying and sort of, you know, creating that alliance with the British men or the men who supported the Union, they devised, there was this punishment that was devised for them. And we read about it in the second part of this poem. Now the second part of this poem is this bit here on line 37 onwards. So we've got this historic part of the poem here all the way up to line 37, a massive part of the poem, and then we've got modern. I don't think this really happens anymore, but it was happening at the time when he wrote it, and he can certainly remember seeing women who have been punished in this way. So this is a hint. They are tied to the railings. If they're caught going out with a boy from the other side, from the other team, they're tied to the railings and they are tarred and feathered, okay? So tied to railings in Belfast or wherever their town is, and hot tar and feathers poured on them. And it's a deep sign of humiliation. It's supposed to deter other people from doing the same thing. They're not supposed to be making this alliance with these men. So if we come up to the top here, when we look at the specific conflict that's involved in this poem, we know, as we've just heard, that, but it's good to keep our notes clean and organised and in order. I always keep my notes the same way every time. There's a specific context, and that is the Northern Ireland versus Republic of Ireland. So you could, you know, it's not exclusively Protestant versus Catholic, but it's a big driving force for that conflict in Northern Ireland. So this is a specific conflict that he's got in mind when he notices this girl, or he hears about how he starts to discover and study this girl, this Winderby girl. So there's obviously the Iron Age, they are in conflict because they have punished sexual sin. Okay, and that's how he gets to hear about it. So we've got this specific conflict going on here, but we've also got an abstract conflict. Whenever you're stuck thinking about conflict, think about, is the poet in conflict with themselves? We call this inner conflict. So he does have inner conflict in this poem, because at the end of the poem he wonders whether he would be brave enough to stand up to the men that have tarred and feathered this girl, or whether he would be brave enough to stand up to the men who are just about to push this girl into the bog, and that's her punishment for cheating on someone, he imagines. So he's got inner conflict. He is uncomfortable being a bystander, but knows he is not brave enough to maybe like fight for justice. Heard that a lot in the news recently, haven't we? You know, silence is violence. The fact that if you stand by and you just let things happen that are wrong, it's as bad as doing them yourself. And I think that he is being very honest in this poem and saying, I probably wouldn't have been brave enough to stand up to the people. So he's got some inner conflict issues going on in this poem too. Going to move across here to the form of this poem. This is in ballad form. Get your notes down, make yours like mine, because there are regular quatrains. Now, as we were talking about over here with the inner conflict, yes, there are regular quatrains, but, and I want you to write this down, combined with enjambment. Now, enjambment is a technique when the line is split, when the sentence rather is split over two lines, and sometimes the quatrains are self-contained and their end stopped. They've got a full stop at the end of them, okay, like this one here and this one here. But sometimes they are broken over two stanzas, and that's really important, and it links to this idea here of inner conflict, and I wonder if you can spot that as we go through this poem. So the first part, as we've said, explains about this girl, the Winby, and the second part talks about the females who have the punishment in Northern Ireland. So what do we think of when we hear this word, the title, punishment? Well, punishment is a deterrence. It's a way to deter people from doing something that the people in charge don't want them to do. It also is how you make an example of someone. Now, we had the word as we were going down here in the poem, if I can just move it down and show you it down here, scapegoat, my poor scapegoat. And that brings into the idea this concept here, that somebody is being made a scapegoat. You know, where's the man in this? Does the man who she's having an affair with get thrown into the bog as well? It doesn't seem to be the case. And so Heaney is making the point that she's been a scapegoat and getting punished for the crime of those two people. Okay, so as we're going through this poem, I'm going to make some notes, and I'm going to make them about structure, language, and I'm going to make some notes about tone as well. So if you can keep up and keep your highlighters separate, then it'll be nice and organised as we go through here. Okay, let's go with language first. I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck, the wind on her naked front. Talking here and beginning to feel really empathetic. That's the first thing I would be noticing about this poem, is that there's an empathetic tone here and down here in stanza 3 as well. I can see, again, empathy for the girl. It's not just something that he's heard about, he's almost imagining that he's there watching her being thrown into the bog. And then we've got this kind of build up here of prepositions. I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck, the wind on her naked front. I think this is a really interesting technique that Heaney brings here. You would think he would want to start his poem off with a burst of creative and emotive language, and actually here it seems really devoid of emotion. Yes, he's feeling empathetic towards her, but not in an emotional way. It seems to be really devoid of emotion, and that's demonstrated here by the succession of prepositions. Just seems like a list of things that he's talking about as he goes down here. And I think he does this to create distance. Because although he's feeling empathy, he's forcing himself away from the situation. Again, coming back to that idea up here. Again, coming back to this idea of inner conflict that he feels. He's uncomfortable being a bystander, but he almost can't help but watch. So he goes into detail down here. This is something that I want you to note down because it's sort of contextual, it's sort of important, but it's definitely for one of you if you're thinking about the higher level grades here. So we've got neck, nipples, ribs. Why would this be important? Well, a blazon poem is a form of poetry where a male poet would categorise the female body parts. You might have explored the poem Porphyria's Lover. This is the idea here where he would go through all the parts of her body that are so perfect that I love this part about you, this part about you. Shakespeare parodied a blazon poem in My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun. But here, Heaney is categorising parts of her body, but he does it in a way to subvert this form, okay, because he's talking about a dead body belonging to this horrible bog woman who, you know, looks probably a little bit worse for wear, to be honest. So what else is important about this little bit here then? I go through maybe this part here. What do we know about amber beads? And amber is a kind of preserving resin. Okay, so he's talking about this little, have you ever seen Jurassic Park, when the flies and mosquitoes are preserved in amber? Well, I think it links to that idea there because she's been preserved. And then we get these interesting end-stopped stanzas. Okay, so the end-stopped stanzas. And this is Heaney again attempting to separate himself. He's trying to create division, but it's going to contrast and work against the enjambment that's going on here. I can see her drowned body in the bog. Why not drown body in the bog? He's got really, really short, 3-word lines here. He could have that as a separate line. I can see her drowned body in the bog. And I want you to see how that the end stop stanzas are working against the enjambment. And yeah, it draws attention to this word drowned, but it also suggests her life is cut short, just like the line. Just like the line is cut short. Okay, do you see how the enjambment is working there? So the end stop stanzas, he's trying to separate himself from this, but the enjambment works against that because he's drawn into the story, suggesting her life is cut short just like the line is cut short. Body in the bog, we've got this lovely sense of alliteration here. Maybe it's suggesting maybe some plosive sounds there. I can feel the tug, I can see her drowned body in the bog. The plosive sounds make this aggressive tone. Maybe he's frustrated by the fact that this punishment is just happening in front of him almost. Although we know it's not, he's just imagining it. And again, the weighing stone, the floating rods and boughs. When we get this, can you see this assonance here? The weighing stone, the floating rods and boughs. An assonance is when the vowel sounds all kind of combined together. It's like almost a little alliteration but with vowel sounds. Now Heaney is quite famous for using lots of assonance. The Irish dialect, the Irish language, Irish Gaelic is very vowel heavy. But here you're really kind of forced to slow down and take in what's happening in here. It's almost like Heaney is looking at what's about to happen. She's in the bog, she's drowning, the stones weighing her down, and all around these rods are kind of floating like little trees, and he's going to liken her to a tree here. So we're forced to slow down and watch as this is happening, under which at first she was a barked sapling, a sapling being a baby tree, and if it's barked, it's had all the bark stripped off it. So again, this is humiliation of this young girl. It also has this sense of youth as well, fragility maybe, totally vulnerable if it hasn't got that protective bark covering. So we've got this youth, this vulnerability of this young girl that he's watching, that is dug up, oak bone, brain furking. So she's become part of the bog. It's almost like she's got oak bone and brain furking. Again, tree imagery. Got this semantic field here of tree. Trees, nature. She's becoming part of it. Her shaved head like a stubble of black corn. So we've gone again back to this idea that he's going to look at her body parts now, her head. He comes across here and looks at her hair, her face. So you can bring that in here to the blazon idea at the top that we went through. But again, we've got this simile, like a stubble of black corn. Just linking her to nature. And just like we wouldn't, condemn a tree or try and punish a flower for doing the wrong thing, it really does highlight her innocence. He's trying to build sympathy for her here by building in all of this natural imagery as though she's just part of nature. Her noose, a ring, this interesting, obviously we know that a noose is the hanging rope that was used to tie around her neck, but this metaphor, it's almost for like a wedding ring, isn't it? Especially at the bottom in this last stanza of this first column here, and her noose, a ring to store the memories of love. So he's trying to focus on the positives here, and rather than create a sort of a horrific graphic poem about how, you know, horrible, what such a horrible person she must have been to be this adulteress, he really is building sympathy here for this character. And the part that this changes now, it's midway through this quatrain, but up to this part he is talking about this character. Now halfway through we've got a change in voice. Okay, this is really, really important. The second person he uses, and we know that he's using second person because he's talking and using the word you, little adulteress, before they punished you. So we've got this change in narrative perspective or narrative voice, second person narrative. Super important, because again we are building sympathy and building a human element into this character. She's not just some forgotten piece of history. She was a human that received an absolutely horrific punishment when she was alive. So it kind of reveals this human element in here. So we've got the shaved head, we've got the fact that it was black like corn, a stubble of black corn, something that's been spoiled. You know, I think of corn as being sweet and yellow, but this is black corn. But before that, she had a whole different life. You were flaxen haired. With flaxen hair, you got fair hair. Okay. So again, we've got this idea linking to a blazon. He's beginning to connect with something that perhaps she was beautiful. It doesn't refer here to the fact to her ethnicity. She wasn't a black girl, but she was tar black because of the bog. But this word here, tar, gets him thinking. It's almost like a trigger to begin the next part of the poem. Now, he doesn't have to call her face tar black, but he's linking directly to those women who are tarred and feathered on the railings. And again, this possessive pronoun here, my poor scapegoat, still talking about her in the second person, but this is a really possessive pronoun, the way to talk about this this girl. She got nothing to do with him. They were alive 2,000 years apart, but he feels really connected. I almost love you. Again, second person. And this is his admission here, but I would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. Look at how well that embedded clause reveals a sense of self-criticism. He's self-critical here, and that embedded clause is key for revealing that self-critical tone. I would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. I am the artful voyeur. Stones of silence. Now, we could talk all day about this image here, the stones of silence, but this is definitely a biblical allusion. And you can look up the passage in the Bible that this is from, but this is the words from Jesus when he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Okay, this is definitely an allusion here that he's making, because super importantly, when Jesus says these words in the Bible, he's talking about a woman who's been caught in adultery. They're saying to him, aren't you going to punish this woman? And he says, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, pick up the first stone, you can cast it at her. And in the story they all walk away because they realise that they have sinned. So we could talk about the biblical allusion here, we could talk about the sibilance, about how this is a respectful tone, perhaps he's whispering these words, the stones of silence. But this is a key phrase, I think, to learn. This whole stanza, you know, if you could learn that, this would be sort of a dynamite stanza for you to learn and use in your exam. I almost love you, but I would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. I am the artful voyeur. Now, a voyeur, as I said previously, is someone who gains pleasure or gains something from watching something that they perhaps shouldn't be watching. So voyeurism, if you're convicted of voyeurism, it means that you've maybe like been peeping into people's windows, and that's, you know, obviously not a good thing to do. But this here, him being all really self-critical again, self-deprecating, I am the artful voyeur. What is he gaining from looking at this bog woman? Because you could say, oh, you know, he's kind of got this sick sense of pleasure by looking at her, and I don't think it's that at all. He gains by selling his poetry, doesn't he? How does he make his living? That's really kind of a confusing point, I know there, that he gains by selling poetry. And so he's gaining by this woman's misfortune and bad experience. That's what makes him the artful voyeur here. And I think that's a really important point to note. And that he's gaining because your brain's exposed and your darkened combs and your muscles webbing and all your numbered bones. This word combs, I looked it up, means underwear. But how interesting is it that this, the end of part one of the poem, even though it's pretty much the whole poem, is this rhyme, combs and bones, and it's almost signalling this closure. It's the only rhyme in the whole poem, and it's signalling this closure of the historic moment, moving into the modern. Does that make sense? So we get this last final two stanzas. I who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters called in tar. Again, he is self-critical of himself. He is, you know, he feels like he is speechless. Betraying sisters. So again, this is talking about the Northern Ireland women who were accused of betraying their Catholic community by going with Unionist soldiers or other men. Okay, so he is not betraying them. They haven't betrayed each other. The sisters refer to just the fact that they are women, you know, as we call each other sister or the sisterhood, that kind of thing. But they are accused of betraying their Catholic community. And we've gone through this specific cultural reference. And what does Heaney think about these women being called in tar and weeping by the railings? Because here, look, he is really building sympathy for these women. Is he going to blast those people who have, you know, done this horrific, or try to punish them in such a horrific way? Is he going to blast these people? Well, actually, no, he's not. He's again going to admit that there is something to understand about this sense of tribal revenge, linking the two women together. Who would connive in civilized outrage? He's saying there's something inside of us that wants to see revenge. This oxymoron here. You can't really have a civilized outrage. And so he's again referring to this conflict, this primitive sense of revenge being something to be understood. I think that's what he's trying to say there. But a super last stanza that we just don't have time to go into in detail today. What else can we say about this poem? Well, I've got a tiny little box here for the messages, which I haven't done for a while, but I think this has got some really key messages, because I think that what Heaney is saying by the time he gets to the end of this poem is he's making a point about conflict in general, and he's saying conflict forces you to take a side, even if that side is not clear, you know, which side you should be on. He feels really sympathetic towards these betraying sisters, but he also feels like they kind of deserve some kind of punishment. And so conflict forces you to take a side, even if that side is not clear cut. So that would be the next one that I would put. Sometimes the divisions are not as clear as they seem. And doesn't that just speak wonderfully about the structure of this poem? It is clear cut, regular quatrains all the way through, but the enjambment kind of bucks against that trend. And so perhaps the message here is sometimes the divisions are not as clear as they seem, both in the poem and in life in general. And I think the final message that he's got is about punishment. He seems to be saying punishment is primitive. Okay, it's a primitive thing that happens. But humans who think they are civilized still sort of revert to it in times of conflict. Just gone outside my box there, but you make sure yours is nice and neat. Conflict forces you to take a side, even if you don't want to. Sometimes the divisions are not as clear as they seem. Punishment is primitive, but civilized people will still revert to it in times of conflict. I think they're the three key messages from this poem. So a little bit of a shorter video today because I've just tried to get some of the key details in. I could talk for hours about this poem. I think it's excellent. So hopefully your notes are looking nice and full. And that's the poem Punishment. Thanks for listening.